What is it? Human trafficking refers to the crime of stealing freedom with the intentions to exploit them for profit. Traffickers often use violence or fraudulent acts as employment, recruitment, or false agreements of education and job opportunities to lure their victims. This includes the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception. Traffickers obtain victims with the objective to gain some type of labor, commercial sex, act, or money. Victims can be men, women, and children of all ages and from all backgrounds, race, and nationality.
Groups fighting to end human trafficking include Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, Polaris, Hope for Justice, Stop the Traffic, International Justice Mission.
Historical groups involved in human trafficking include Portugal traveled to Africa for human trafficking in the 16th century. In 1999, International Labor Organization was Protection for Working Conditions. In 1807, Britain first outlawed slavery, and in 1820, the United States outlawed slavery.
Important human trafficking cases include NXIVM offered executive success programs, assisting aspiring leaders with personal and professional development. Media alleged that NXIVM influenced and controlled to coerce its members into sexual activity with its founder. In 2018, NXIVM founder Keith Raniere was arrested on charges including sexual trafficking, sex trafficking conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit forced labor. R. Kelly, an award-winning R&B artist, faced accusations of abuse and exploitation of young people and children for 2 decades before finally being convicted in 2021 on 8 counts of violating the Mann Act, which bans the transportation of people across borders for any immoral purpose. American financier Jeffrey Epstein was accused of running a network of underage girls for sex for himself and others, and was arrested in 2019 on charges of sex trafficking of minors. Andrew Tate, a self-described misogynist, has always invited controversy with his comments regarding women that many label as hate speech. In December 2022, Tate, his brother, and 2 associates were arrested in Romania on charges of human trafficking, rape, and being part of an organized crime group.
1900 to 1910. The International Agreement for the Suppression of White Slave Traffic. White slavery includes by use of force, deceit, or drugs of a white woman or girl against her will for prostitution. International conferences against white slavery took place in both 1899 and 1902. In 1904, the Mann Act/International Agreement for the Suppression of White Slave Traffic was signed as the first international agreement on human trafficking, focusing on migrant women and children. In 1910, 13 countries signed the International Convention for the Suppression of White Slave Trade to make this form of trafficking illegal. 1919, the International Labor Organization. In 1919, the International Labor Organization was formed in order to provide protective standards for working conditions such as pay and hours.
1921, International Convention for the Suppression of Traffic in Women and Children. The League of Nations was founded, the first international organization of nations with the goal of maintaining world peace and focusing on international issues such as human trafficking. 33 countries signed, changing white slavery to traffic in women and children so that everyone was included, regardless of race, and children of both genders were seen as victims of trafficking. 1949, United Nations Convention for the Suppression of the Traffic in Persons and of the Exploitation of the Prostitution of Others. The member nations of the United Nations adopted the United Nations Convention for the Suppression of the Traffic in Persons and of the Exploitation of the Prostitution of Others, the first legally binding international agreement on human trafficking. Only 66 nations have ratified it.
1980. Internet and social media. At this time, it is no longer necessary to move exploited individuals to a specific physical location. Video streaming, a victim can remain in one location and be exploited all over the world. As well, social media is now being used in the grooming and recruitment of trafficking victims and in the advertising and sales of sexual services. 2000. United Nations Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. In 2000, the United Nations adopted the United Nations Protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. This was the first agreement that acknowledged modern-day slavery, as well as the possibility of men being victims of human trafficking. The definition was also expanded to include organ harvesting, slavery, and forced labor.
Cons are post-traumatic stress, difficulty in relationships, depression, memory loss, anxiety, fear, guilt, shame, and other severe forms of mental trauma. And then the facts and propaganda. Trafficking is portrayed as something that only happens to women, where in reality about 4 in 10 victims detected between 2012 and 2014 were trafficked for forced labor, and out of these victims, 63% were men. Also, often portrayed as only limiting to sex trafficking, but in reality there are 3 common kinds of trafficking: sex trade, forced labor, and domestic servitude.
Evidence-based reasons human trafficking exists today. There is a demand for cheap labor, services, and commercial sex. There is a desire for profit, with less fear of punishment and legal consequence. Prediction for the future. People need to become more educated on human trafficking to know what to do. Human trafficking increased 84% from 2011 to 2020.
Based on all the information presented, human trafficking is inhumane. Trafficking has effects on economics, compromises social standards, and ends up harming many individuals and aspects of the world.